Hi everyone, my name is Craig and I'm a video producer, and today I want to talk about the Sony A7 IV and my hopes for their announcement of that camera, hopefully before the end of the year or early 2022. If you are wondering why we have heard no news yet about the release date of the A7 IV, it is most likely because of a sensor shortage due to the pandemic over the last 18 months or so. Camera manufacturing has slowed down across the board, which is why Sony has been unable to give us any information about when the A7 IV is going to come out. So at the time of this recording, we have no real way of knowing what specs are going to be included in the A7 IV, but based on what Sony has been doing over the last 2 years, I think we can make some educated guesses about what is going to be included in this camera. So I wanted to talk today about some of those hopes. This is coming from someone who currently uses the Sony A1, the A7S III, and the A7 III, and I have extensive experience using all of these cameras in a variety of situations. I'm going to break this video up into two sections. First, I'm going to talk about my expectations for the A7 IV, and these are things that I totally believe they have to put in this camera, or I and content creators all over the world will be very disappointed. And then we're going to shift to some of my hopes. And these are things that I just really am hoping that they put in, but it's not going to be a deal breaker for me if they decide not to include these features. Okay, so let's dive right into it. Starting off, my expectation list is the new menu system. Sony introduced a brand new menu system in the A7S III, and initially I was pretty indifferent about it. I thought it was a welcome change at the time, but after living with it for about a year, I must say this menu is head over heels better than the older menu system we see on the A7 III and older camera models. The older menu system is super clunky and slow to find what you're looking for. I was surprised at the announcement of the Sony ZV-E10 and that they would be including their old menu system in that new vlogging camera. I somewhat understood it because they're basically repurposing parts from their older cameras like the Sony A6000 series, but I was really hoping that we would see some new software in that camera, but we didn't. As we look ahead to the Sony A7 IV, I can't imagine a situation in which they would go backwards in time and give us the old menu system, so I expect that to be in their new model. Okay, next is no record limits. We have got to get rid of this 30-minute record limit in the A7 IV. It was so frustrating trying to shoot multicam interviews with a pair of A7 IIIs and have to manually walk over to the camera and reset it at 30 minutes. I remember interviews in which I thought that they would be under half an hour, and it would seem like her interviewee would be wrapping up right around the 28-minute mark, and I would just be sitting there praying, please finish before 30 minutes so I don't have to break up these files into multiple clips. It just made for a mess in post-production. And with my A7S IIIs, I just hit record and I don't worry about running out of space. So for me, this is a feature that is a must-have in order for me to be interested in purchasing this camera for video production purposes. Okay, next is improved color science. In the A7 IV, we definitely need to see some improved color science and accuracy, especially when shooting in S-Log. I primarily shoot in S-Log 3, and unless you expose perfectly in the field, colors fall apart pretty easily, especially at higher ISOs. I'm expecting to see some 10-bit color options in this camera, at least for a few shooting modes, and I would also love to be able to shoot under 800 ISO in S-Log 3 because that limitation forced me to always use ND filters at all times when shooting outdoors. And that was really frustrating on the A7 III. So overall, just colors really need to be improved, especially in their S-Log 3 setting. Okay, the last big expectation that I really want to see in the A7 IV for myself is better external recording benefits. With the A7 III, I only saw two real benefits to using an external recorder. The first being no record limits, which was obviously a huge benefit, but I really don't want to have to put on a big monitor just so I can record longer than 30 minutes. And then the other benefit was with the Atomos Ninja 5, you could get 8-bit 422 instead of 420 color, which just saw marginal improvements at best. I expect to see the A7 IV open up some external recording options that we didn't see before. I'd love to see the ability to record 10-bit 422 in several codecs, maybe ProRes RAW, and maybe even some higher quality frame rates because 1080p at 120 frames just didn't look very good on the A7 III. So in short, I'd love for there to be more benefits when using an external recorder, which would incentivize me to rig out the A7 IV as a cinema rig. Okay, moving on to my hopes. Okay, my first hope is 4K 60 at a lower end codec. It would be very nice to see 4K 60 frames a second in the A7 IV. I really don't expect them to give us the highest codecs at 4K 60 because at that point they'd be taking away from what makes the A7S III so special. And I don't think that would be a very financially viable option for Sony to do that at this time. However, if they gave us 4K 60 at 8-bit 420, I think that would be a welcome addition to the camera. Right now, the A7 III, we only get 4K up to 30 frames a second, which is definitely a limitation for content creators. I know personally for my concert edits or my wedding films, I would love to be able to switch everything over to 4K, but for those shooting situations, it's a necessity to have at least 60 frames a second so I can slow things down in post. Ideally, we would have 120 frames a second at 4K, but I think there is no shot that we'll get that because it would just take away way too much of what the A7S III offers. So I'll gladly settle for 4K at 60 frames a second at a lower codec. Okay, my next hope is a new grip design. The new ergonomics of the Sony A1 and the A7S III have really changed my perception of what it feels like to have a Sony camera in my hands. Back when I was shooting on the A7S II and the A7 III, I never really consciously thought about how small the grip was. Of course, if I put a Canon or a Nikon DSLR in my hands, I could tell the difference, but at the same time, I just appreciated the smaller form factor of the Sony mirrorless bodies. However, Sony's new flagship cameras, I've grown to love and appreciate the extra depth that we get in those handles, and it makes for a much more pleasant shooting experience, especially when shooting all day long handheld. I would love to see a redesign to the A7 IV with some improved ergonomics and handling. Also, they've got to get rid of those super loud strap clamps that destroy all scratch audio. Those things are horrible. Okay, my next hope is full-size HDMI. If we do indeed get a larger grip, I think that this would also allow for a slightly larger body overall, which might allow for a full-size HDMI port. It has been so convenient moving to the full-size HDMI in the A7S III and the A1 for video production purposes. With my A7 III, I would always have to find my micro HDMI adapter, and the dongle life just gets really frustrating after a while. Thank you, Apple. Full-size HDMI would make integration with external recorders way easier and would minimize the amount of cables and adapters I need to bring on a video shoot. I would so appreciate a full-size HDMI, but this is definitely more of a hope rather than an expectation. And if I had to guess, I don't know if they'll include this in the A7 IV. Okay, the last hope I have is actually a photo feature that I'd love to see, and that is better silent shooting capabilities. I'd love to see if somehow we could get 24 frames a second silent shooting so that we'd be able to do some insanely high frame rate bursts in settings that normally would feel inappropriate to shoot a rapid burst of images. Another problem that I have faced with the silent shooting option is while shooting indoors. I see some serious banding depending on what the indoor lighting situation is like, and if this could be addressed in the newer model, I'd really appreciate it, and it'd be a lifesaver for being able to shoot silently under like LED lights or fluorescent tubes. Also, overall, the shutter is just pretty loud when I compare it to my Sony A1, so I'd love to see some better silent shooting options as well as just a quieter shutter overall. Okay, that's going to wrap it up for my expectations and hopes for the Sony A7 IV. These are just my hopes, and I would love to hear from you. What are your hopes for when you think about what you want to see in this new camera? Drop those in the comment section below. Thank you so much for taking time to watch this video. If you enjoyed it, feel free to give it a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Much love.